living a full and well life is put together, authentic.
We feel it.
Take care of ourselves.
Hello and welcome back to the Wishing You Well podcast. I'm Amy.
And I'm Catherine. And today on Wishing You Well, we are welcoming back Carli King, who is a therapist at Revive. And she has so much to share with us today, all about narrative therapy.
Yes. And if you don't know what that is, don't worry. We're going to talk about that. And we always love having Carli on. She is going to share with us today, not only about narrative therapy, but some narratives that she's gotten stuck in. So we look forward to you hearing from her.
Yeah, and the reason that we're doing this is because we talk about stories all the time with our guests, and we thought it would be best if we zoom out a little bit and talk about why these stories are so important.
Yes. All right, let's get into it.
Okay. Well, Carli, you are a Wishing You Well veteran at this point, so you know where we're going to start. You know what we're going to ask you. We're going to ask you about self-care. How are you doing? However, wait, before you answer that, I also let you in on a little Wishing You Well preview that we want to know about fun in your life. So if you can just bring that into your self-care check-in, that would be fantastic.
Okay, sounds good. Self-care for me this week is looking like honestly just checking in with myself and trying to stay emotionally in tune. I did recently have a loss in my family, and so I notice when I start to maybe avoid a little bit or start to like check out, and just trying to like stay with myself. But in terms of fun, I recently had a lot of fun traveling with my family, and we got to do like so many fun, cool things. We got to like visit some parks and do Universal Studios. So that's the type of fun that like I'm into and would love to have more of in my life. So of course, upon returning, it's like planning for when we're able to do that again. So anything that involves like fun, family, food, being outdoors, like I'm all for that.
Are you the mom that stands and watches people go on the rides, or are you the mom that's going on the rides too and having that kind of fun?
It depends on the ride. So I like to have fun. I don't like to terrify myself. Okay. So when it comes to like roller coasters and things like that, I used to be afraid of them. I conquered my fear and decided I was going to ride them. And am now able to say for sure, I hate them. I don't like it. I don't like the feeling of dropping and like my stomach is just like in my chest. I don't like it. So I will ride things that spin and turn, even things that flip, but going straight down, that one is not for me. Thankfully, most of the Harry Potter rides like fit within that category. So I was able to have a lot of fun. And Universal, you know, they have a lot of like 4D, 3D, 4D and like immersive experience rides. So that I'm all for.
I love that. And I think one of the things Catherine and I were talking about with fun is like a lot of having fun is us tapping into like our child like selves, like getting into that playfulness, and it sounds like in the environment that you were in, and also being with your daughter, like too, like that helped you tap into that as well.
Oh, for sure. Like watching her experience things, either for the first time or just like explore what she likes, it definitely takes me back to that place. So hard relate on that.
Cool.
And at the same time, you're not sacrificing your idea of fun just for everybody else. So that's also something we talked about as far as just like having your own version of fun is really important.
Yes, I will stand and hold the bags if you'd like to go and terrify yourself. That's fine with me.
I don't like roller coasters either, for the record. Not my version of fun.
Okay.
I don't know if I do anymore. I don't know, because I don't think I've been on them in like adulthood. So I'd have to like check it out now to see. I might be in your boat though. I don't know.
I'm gonna say it might be a different experience this time around. You never know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Catherine, what about you? What is self-care looking like this week? What was something fun you did between this week and last week?
Okay. I wrote down a whole list of things that I might not have before even tried to like categorize as fun. And then I think intentionally, because we were doing this exercise, I was taking note. And so it's just a couple of things. On Sunday, after I worked out, which was its own version of fun, I was by myself. So I drove home with my sunroof open. Let me tell you that when I got this car, I was like really, really excited to get a sunroof. And I never put it down or put it back because my daughter's always in the back and it makes so much noise because whoever built this car was like, let's also throw the roof rack over the sunroof and make all this windy, crappy, stupid noise. So it's just never open. And so I opened it because I was by myself and I don't care about the noise. So I just had a great time driving home. 8 minutes of fun. Then I had a really, really fun time picking paint colors for my front door of my new house. Picked some samples and I have yet to try them out, but that's going to be fun number 2 is actually like slapping them on the door and picking that one. And then my last but not least kind of fun is that I pre-baby I would bake a lot, and I have baked like pretty seldom since she's been born. So on Monday I decided I had the day off and I decided to bake during her nap, and I made chocolate chip cookies the old-fashioned way, and it was fantastic.
Sounds awesome. And like those kind of like not non-traditional fun things that we were talking about last week too.
Right. I was leaning into the little areas that I would find, little things that I would find fun that like I made a bigger deal than I typically would, and that was great.
Mm-hmm. Do you think paying attention to those things or even just doing those things impacted your self-care?
Absolutely. I mean, I think all of those things became self-care because I was paying attention to them. And that's, always what we're talking about when it comes to self-care. So I think I was doing it right.
Mm-hmm. I love how your competitiveness comes out. You're like, I'm an overachiever. I made a list and I got an A. Fun.
And I'm talking to my fellow competitor, Carli.
Who? Well.
For those listening, when Revive does some competitive things, in my head, it's always me versus Carli.
Wow, Catherine. Okay, got it. Someone's coming for me. I just let the record show that's because I tend to win a lot. Okay, so that's why Catherine is now coming for me. Let's just be clear about that.
That's true. I can confirm. I don't know that there's been one Revive game that Carli has lost. So
no, I'm such a loser. Moving on. Amy, how are you? How's your self-care? How is the fun in your life?
Well, I just want to point out that Catherine sort of called me out before we started recording because I'm going on vacation in a couple of days, and she was like, "So, are you stressed? Like, how are you before going on vacation?" And I said, like, "Do I seem stressed?" And she's like, "Well, I know how you can be." And she's right. And it was such a good reminder. What I'd said to her was, I've definitely been noticing that like my temper is maybe a little bit shorter, or like my patience is like running thin, and I'm having like bigger reactions to things that I probably wouldn't at a different point. So I appreciate, the gentle awareness that Catherine provided to me. So kind of piggybacking on what your self-care was, Carli, I think like, I'm really trying to pay attention to that, to like what my reactions are, and like really as an effort to get myself to vacation, not at my highest point of stress, so that I can actually enjoy my vacation and don't have to spend the entire vacation like de-stressing. So I'm trying to like regulate my emotions enough so that it doesn't feel like I need to like completely numb out in a few days. So that's what self-care is looking like. But for fun, I've been like trying to pay attention to laughter a lot. And I was over the weekend, I'm here in Miami and by myself, which is its own version of fun because I get to do whatever I want, which is great. And I was like kind of laying on the couch watching a show that I know my husband would hate. And so I was watching a show. I was laughing out loud to it, like sitting like with watermelon, laying down, sitting with a bowl of watermelon like on my stomach, laughing hysterically. And I was like, this is fun. Like, I'm having a fun time. I feel like I'm, getting to do what I want, actually laughing and getting to eat something that I enjoy in a way that feels like a little indulgent. So that was fun. And then,
Wait. Can you tell us what show?
Oh, I'm watching Girls on HBO.
Oh,
Yeah. And it's a show
Oh.
that I've sort of like resisted watching. I had some preconceptions about what it would be. And it's like it's like Sex in the City for this age, where it's like such a satire. Like, all of the characters are so hateable and but like funny in that way because they're so out of control. So that's what I'm watching. And I've like binged it. I'm almost done. Yeah.
I watched
So-
that one when it came out, so I'm
you
familiar.
did?
But it's been a while, so
Yeah.
yeah.
No, it's a little it's a little wild.
Yeah.
So I've been enjoying watching that. But I also on Monday night, Chris and I are watching The Bachelorette for our Reactivity TV podcast, and we were watching it separately but together, and we had such a like playful exchange about the show, and that was also a lot of fun in kind of watching something together, having differences of opinion, but being able to like debate in a healthy, like fun way. That also was so much fun. So those two things stuck out to me as my fun for the week.
It's so nice. And it's nice that like you two do that because it's fun already. Like watching the show is really fun. Recording and like having that banter together is fun. But like to actually, it's also work because you're doing it. You're making the podcast. Like, this podcast is work, but it's also really fun. And so it's really cool when you can pull those things together.
Yeah, do both at once for sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So just because our fun check-in stops today, I do want us to continue to check in about fun. Yeah.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
I'm going to start making lists now too.
But who's really competitive here?
I'm low key, high key competitive. Like, I'm very competitive. Okay. So we are so happy to have you back again. As Catherine said, our kind of most veteran guest, our highly requested guest. And today we're talking about something a little bit different, and a lot of what we have been shifting in to do here on Wishing You Well is really learn about and hear about other people's stories, kind of like what influences them, what's kind of brought them to where they are in this point in their life today. And when we were kind of thinking about that, we had an idea of starting to step back and look at it almost in a more meta way. And you had come to mind because you are a therapist who has a lot of training and draws a lot from narrative therapy, which, you know, by the name, and you're going to tell us more about it, also has to do with stories. And so we thought it would be cool to invite you on to talk about what narrative therapy is and how we can use it as a tool, but also how like your stories have led you here today too.
100%. I'm excited to talk about narrative therapy today. I don't know where the discussion will go in terms of like our own stories, but it's one that just like resonated with me from the beginning. So I can't wait to dive in.
You start by telling our audience what it is.
Yeah, so I'm going to give my version, maybe not the exact textbook version, but narrative therapy is really just about understanding people's stories, hearing their stories, understanding the meaning that they draw from their stories, and looking for opportunities to help them rewrite their stories in many cases. And so I often say, like, I don't think it's just what we go through that affects us or just what happens to us. It's what we tell ourselves about what that means, and kind of what we draw from that, how that shapes our own sense of identity, how that shapes our expectations of people around us, of the world around us, how it shapes how we understand the things that we go through and that we experience. And so, just like from the very beginning, when I learned about narrative therapy in school, it was one that just resonated with me right away. I think of my own life in the form of a story. I can recognize like how much meaning I pull from that, because like I have experiences that others have had, but they might not draw the same meaning from those experiences that I do. And so it made me think about the way I see myself, the way I view my own life, in a way that just made a lot of sense to me. And so from that time on, I think I was just drawn toward it. Thankfully had a few professors who were narrative therapists, which really helped because I got to see what it looked like in real time being practiced. And it's just one of those, to me, one of those theories that is somewhat overarching. It shapes a lot of how I view my clients' cases. And it just, I don't know, it just made a lot of sense.
So can you, I mean, I know you referenced in your life that you've seen, you view your life almost through that lens of a story. Like, can you share how you might connect that for yourself, or maybe how you've seen it show up with your clients and in viewing their life through that lens?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when it comes to me, um, I definitely like just the self-talk, I guess, that goes on in my head definitely feels a bit like a storyline. You know, most of us see ourselves as like the lead character in our story, in the story of our lives. Um, and so, you know, from the time that I was a little girl, I feel like I've had a pretty like strong sense of awareness of like myself in relation to others, very aware of other people around me, what they expected of me. I'm like the kid of a pastor, and so that kind of comes with its own set of expectations. Um, and so I think I always viewed myself in that way. What I didn't always see was how some of those meanings, or like how much of my identity had been influenced by how I was viewing my story, and kind of like those different roles that I played, and how attached I was to those roles, and sometimes still am in a lot of ways. So for me, when in learning about narrative therapy, there was the need for a lot of like deconstructing, or at least challenging my perspective on things and my ideas. I was a very rigid kid in terms of my ideas. I think that has softened a bit, but I can still be quite rigid. And so just even like noticing things about myself that maybe need to be challenged, or a perspective that I'm like really, really set in, that like maybe there's another way to look at that. And so, you know, in terms of how it comes up with clients, I meet with a lot of clients who are very attached to their narrative about their life. You know, this is what happened to me. This is what it did to me. This is why I'm stuck here. And I do think there's a delicate dance that you have to do as a therapist of validating those experiences, but also challenging clients to consider the possibility of like, what if we attached a different meaning here? What if that wasn't the end of this story? What if there was a different way to look at the other players in this particular story? And so I think that like relies heavily on developing a close relationship where there's trust to be able to do that. But that is often like the walk that I'm taking with clients in their journey in challenging some of those stories.
Yeah. Well, even as you were just describing that about, kind of like taking a different look at the roles in the story, I noticed myself having a reaction to that of like, oh, like, I don't know if I want to do that, or like, oh, like this feels like it's gonna shake things up a lot. Like, what do you notice about, when you present that idea to clients, or even as you think about it for yourself when you were going through your own like discovery around the story that you were telling yourself? Like, what is it that makes it challenging to maybe shift a narrative, or rather like what might make it hard to kind of move out of this stuck place?
That's a great question. I think it is always easier to see in other people than it is in yourself.
Mhm.
So, when it comes to clients, sometimes I can see things about just the way they tell their story or themes that seem to show up where I'm like, okay, that's a piece of their narrative that they're really attached to. But because I've had my own experiences of having to challenge my stories, I feel like I try to do that somewhat delicately and try to really understand like why such an attachment to this particular way of viewing something. I think it's hard because you often have to let go of something in order to pick up the possibility of a different narrative, And so, for me, it was things like having to let go of the idea that I was a victim in some way. Being a victim in some instances can serve you quite well. It can give you an excuse to maybe not change certain things or a reason to blame someone else or some situation for why you are where you are or how you are. So having to let go of that means that that's no longer like my shield. That's no longer my protection. I maybe can't lean on that as a crutch when I'm, wanting to make a change. And so I think from the outside looking in, it can look really, easy. And it is somewhat simple, but it is not always easy. And so I find
Easy.
the hardest part is like letting go because that narrative means something to you. And it's not always like from a victim perspective, but that narrative might like really hold meaning for you that if you let
Mhm.
go of that piece, it can feel like kind of destabilizing. Like, then what am I leaning on? Then why do I do this? Why am I the way that I am? So I think that's one of the most challenging parts. I don't know if you all feel like you experience that with clients or yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was just gonna say, like, one of the things that I wrestle a lot with is like just due to my upbringing, kind of one of the roles that I play is in trying to make everyone comfortable and happy. And that I feel like that's a big part of my responsibility. And so if I don't, or if people are uncomfortable, or maybe they don't like me, that's a really big problem. And so it's really informed the way that I show up in my life, and show up for myself or don't. And it's something that I, work a lot on and talk a lot about in therapy. And I truly am at an ambivalent state of like, yeah, I see it's a problem, but like, I'm not totally convinced, or feel totally, I feel pretty anxious about what it would look like, or what it would mean for me to operate differently. It would dramatically change my relationships. And like, literally, I felt like my heart just dropped into my stomach as I said that. Like, it's really stressful. And so I feel like when I encounter this with my clients, where there is this like, okay, I see it, but like, I'm not quite ready yet. I have so much empathy for them, because it is so much, as you said, it's simple, but it's not easy. And like being at a place where we're able to address or shift parts of our narrative does come with discomfort too, even if we're uncomfortable in where we currently are.
I think also when we've had guests on who have this story, like we're saying, they're coming to us with not like the final touches of the story, but they're coming to the podcast having already rewritten some of the story, kind of like you're saying. Like they've already created that different relationship with the past, or a traumatizing thing that happened, or just something really profound in their life. They've already met it in a different way than maybe years ago when we would have had them on, where they would be at. And so it's interesting that what we're talking about here is sort of like that introductory, and then like that middle ground of like what happens when you start to look at this story, and not necessarily like years down the line when, oh, I created this product, or like I and now work in XYZ because of this thing that happened to me in life. It's amazing that like we do hear those stories, but it's like that middle and like that beginning nitty gritty that we might be missing out on, when we hear these stories. Like they take us back to those times, but like when you're actually in the thick of it, or like you're continuously, battling this or like challenged with it, like you're talking about, Amy, it's such a different story, because like you're in the middle of the story, it's still happening, but it's not quite at a place that you're comfortable with yet.
Oh, 100%, because you don't know how things are going to play out, even still, right? And so, like, talking to someone when they're at the beginning or middle of challenging and or changing their narrative, like that's a totally different space. It's very vulnerable. It's very much like day to day, because these are choices that you have to continue to make every day that you like wake up, and that you maybe continue to feel challenged in new ways. And so yeah, I could totally see how that looks a lot different when someone's maybe on the other side of that particular challenge versus when you're in it. It's a lot harder than it might seem from the outside looking in.
Do you think that people need to necessarily be shaped by these stories, or like be shaped by something that happened to them, in order for then to like triumph over something later and like feel like successful in some way? Do you think they need that, or they need, well, one, I guess, like, do you think you need that to be successful? But then also, like, can you turn everything that happens to you into something later on,
Or
in a
should
positive
you?
way? Yeah, or should you? Yeah.
Yeah, because I think those are two different questions. Like, can you? Sure, why not? Like, who's to say that you can't? Should you? I don't know. I don't know if everyone has that need per se. I think with a lot of my clients, the conversation that we end up having is like, if you could, would you want to? You know what I mean? Because it's not necessarily my role to tell them that they need to take this, whatever it is, a traumatic experience or something they've gone through, and like turn it into something that they perceive to be positive. But if they are in some way unhappy with where they've landed, or they feel like that's keeping them stuck, and they knew that there was the possibility of changing that, would you want to? Right. And then if they are open to that, then we can kind of have a conversation about what that would look like. And I can hopefully help support them through that. But I think most people want to, even if they're not ready to totally let go of that previous narrative. I think most people don't want to be defined by their most difficult moment or most difficult experience. But I think ultimately it ends up happening, like whether we kind of want it to or not, those moments, the stories that we tell ourselves and that we replay in our own minds and our own self talk do end up shaping who we are, how we show up, the choices that we make, the things we avoid, the things we pursue, right? So I think the way that I perceive it is like the process is happening regardless. All we're trying to do is like bring a little bit of awareness to it so that you could maybe have more choice and more say in that. But for a lot of people, I think that they're being defined by something, whether they're consciously aware of it or not.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder too, like, again, I'm thinking about this, like, again, the roles that we might assign ourselves. Like you would use the concept of like being a victim, and there are things that can happen in our life that might validate that role and that identity. And it sounds like what you're talking about is like, yeah, that it doesn't mean that that's not true or those things didn't happen, but maybe we can distance ourselves, our identity, from being fully defined by this one role we play, that it can be that there's some room here for us to also be a survivor, or also be just a regular human, that it doesn't need to be this all encompassing role that we play all the time.
100%. That's like one of the key tenets of narrative therapy, is helping to separate people from their problems. Again, not in a way that invalidates their experience, but where their entire identity doesn't have to be defined by this moment or by this experience. And so we talk a lot about like problem saturated stories, or, our self-talk and the things that we replay. And then also like dominant discourses, or like these societal ideas and pressures and stories that we're told about who we should be and how we should be and what we should be able to accomplish or not. And so like you're kind of working against all of that when you're challenging someone to separate from their problems, when problems are real. Like there are very real barriers often to us accomplishing whatever it is that we want to accomplish. So you're absolutely right. It's the delicate dance of validating that that is a real experience or that is a real challenge. And also we want to see it separate from our identity. So rather than seeing myself as an anxious person or a depressed person, in narrative therapy, we're looking at, well, what is my relationship like with anxiety or depression, because those things exist outside of me, but I'm having an interaction with them right now that maybe feels like really overwhelming or just feels really all encompassing. But just that little separation to say you are not defined by that thing, that's an experience that you're having, oftentimes can kind of like free people just enough to maybe see a little bit above or around, the thing that they're having a hard time overcoming.
Yeah.
It's so powerful. It's such a small like verbiage to change, but it's such a powerful thing. Language. Wow.
Absolutely. And as you were talking about dominant discourse, I love that is such a big part of narrative therapy, or one thing that you can talk about within narrative therapy, because I think that sometimes, like, for example, for our listeners that like might need a concrete example, like one thing that comes up a lot in my work with clients is like body image, right? And like, or like female body image for, and there are a lot of um, societal pressures, maybe, or expectations about what a female body should look like, what a female body is for, what just, and maybe gender roles in general. We can just even zoom out even more. And so while a lot of the way that we might view ourselves might be very influenced by our society as a whole, I think sometimes clients feel like, well, this is just how society is and it's not changing, so I guess I'm stuck here. And whereas it sounds like within a narrative framework, you can say like, yes, those things can influence you, and you can shift your relationship to what those expectations are, or you can shift your view of, or how you feel like you'd like to show up within those expectations, that it doesn't have to feel like, oh, I'm just condemned to this space because like this is what society tells me. Does that make sense?
100. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's a good use of that example, because you're absolutely right. Those messages are there, and there's a good chance, like, I mean, we could say they are shifting in some ways. Maybe they're different than they were 10, 20, 30 years ago, but we're still having an experience with those expectations and those ideas. And so, like, for some people, just giving them a frame that suggests, yeah, it makes a lot of sense that you're feeling a lot of pressure because look at all of this messaging that you've received. Look at how this has been reinforced in your life. Look at these experiences that you've had that have affirmed these ideas. It makes sense that this is a difficult thing to overcome. And you can kind of see people like kind of take a breath. Okay, so maybe it's not just me, and maybe there's not just something inherently wrong with me. Maybe it makes sense that I'm struggling in this way, and it relieves a little bit of the pressure that then allows them to feel like they have a little bit more choice in what they're going to do and how they respond to that pressure,
Mhm.
you know?
If you don't mind, you mentioned before that there were a lot of things that you learned about what narrative you had of yourself, how things that happened to you, things that you grew up around, influenced who you became, etc. And one of those things you said, you're the daughter of a pastor. Can you talk about some of those things as far as like what influenced you there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know how much time we have today, but but my relationship with my faith is something that has absolutely evolved over time, just in terms of how I define it, what I think it means, you know, and kind of the seat that I sit in. I think there were a lot of expectations of me. Some it came from outside, but a lot was like learned and then self-inflicted in terms of, you know, what it meant to be the daughter of a pastor or to have my life or my life decisions potentially on display to be judged, you know, to feel the pressure of needing to make my parents proud and kind of, you know, affirm and validate everything that they stood for or stand for, you know, and wanting to kind of embody that, feeling a lot of pressure about that, that I don't even know that I perceived it as pressure as a kid. I think I just perceived it as like, you know, this is life and this is what's expected of me and this is what I'm supposed to do. And I was very much a rule follower. Like I was by the book. I like to get things right. I didn't want to need to be corrected, which meant that if I was going to do something wrong, I was going to be very sneaky about it. I was not going to be out in the open. Um, and it's so interesting because I'm thinking about this as I'm saying it, and I have a younger brother who is very different from me. I think he responded to that pressure very differently because in a lot of ways, like he didn't care as much as I did, and I very much cared about like image and perception and all of those things. And as I got older, I think it was a process of challenging that. I didn't have like one moment that kind of turned everything around. But I think my own relationship with my faith evolved. It was challenged in some ways that I did not totally expect, that I thought were actually quite unfair. Like, you know, I did these things and this is the outcome that I was supposed to get. And so I had to grapple with that. You know, what does that mean? What does that mean about the way I perceive my faith? And then a lot of the ideas that I think were just kind of set in stone early on, I had a lot of questions about. One thing, even as a young kid, I had a lot of questions, and if something didn't make sense to me, I was like, "You're going to need to make this add up." And so I kind of had some moments of conflict, you know, with people I grew up with my own family, just about like, no, this isn't adding up. And you told me this, and now I'm seeing this or I'm learning this, and I don't know that I can rely on that anymore. But one of the things that it did do was force me, or maybe not force me, but give me the opportunity to establish my own relationship with my faith and with God, and to determine like, what does that mean to me and how can I show up in this world every day in a way that I feel proud of, that may not always align with the vision that I had for myself as a kid, or the vision that I thought others had for me as a kid. So yeah, that's the short version, but a lot more
Mhm.
to that because it's also weaved into other parts of my identity as a woman, as a Black woman, being from, where I'm from Pittsburgh. And so there are a lot of other elements of my identity that I think were wrapped up in that as they started to unravel, it kind of unraveled other things that I wasn't totally expecting. So yeah, that's a little tip of the iceberg there.
So when it unraveled,
Mm-hmm.
life looked a little bit messy.
A lot messy. A lot messy because, like I said, it wasn't one moment. It was a slow unraveling, and then like different pieces unraveling, and then kind of like, okay, so then what does this mean? And how is this going to change how I perceive myself? So yes, it looked very messy for a long time. And if I'm being honest, it's still messy in a lot of ways. Like there are pieces of that I am still figuring out to this day.
Has your relationship to the messiness then changed?
Yes, it has, thankfully, because otherwise I probably would not be sitting here talking to you guys. I would be on someone's couch, like trying to figure out my life right now. But I've accepted that that's a part of the process. Like one thing about this work, and I think we were having this conversation in a different setting, but like how much of this work requires that you do your own self-reflecting. And you would really think that after all this time, that it kind of like gets easier, or that you're like super excited when you discover something about yourself that maybe needs to be challenged. And yes, I hate it. I'm like, damn it, like there's another thing that I have to look at, or something else that I have, just when I maybe felt comfortable in one particular space. Now I've got to go and like challenge this other piece. So I had tried to change my relationship with that messiness, where I've just accepted that this is a part of doing life. I could stay where I am and be as comfortable as I can be in this particular spot. And in doing that, I may be forfeiting opportunities for growth, opportunities for change, opportunities to deepen my work with my clients if I just decide that I'm done doing my own self work. And that's not worth it to me. And so then I have to just get comfortable with the fact that things are probably going to look messy. And one day it might be this corner that looks a little messy, and then I might clean that up, and then it'll be the other corner that looks messy. So it just comes with the territory at this point.
You just need to find a round room. What are you doing?
That's the key. I love that reframe. Great narrative therapy.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, and I think it's making me think about, and I don't know kind of like which stage of development you are at, Carli, when you started kind of stepping back and looking at your narrative and the roles, but it's making me think a lot about how this can tend to happen in early adulthood when we do have a little bit of a separation from our families of origin, perhaps, or we are introduced to other perspectives, and that can cause us to hold a mirror up in a way, or have a mirror held up to us in a way that we didn't really ever have before, because we're exposed to something completely different. And I imagine that this is why like so many 20 somethings or people in that stage of life do have that like quarter life crisis, or like that existential crisis of like, who am I? What am I? What do I want? What do I need? Because I think like, for whether we do it on purpose or not, we are introduced to ourselves in a different way at that point.
100%. And I think for me, it was around that time. College was one experience, going away and getting that experience, but it still felt a little bit like following the script, and it wasn't. And I kind of rushed through the script, if I'm being honest. I was like, check, 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 graduate early, graduate with honors, done, done, done. And then it was like, okay, so now what? And then having to figure out, and there was a lot going on in the economy at that time, like things were a little bit different, but it kind of hit me a little bit like a brick wall at that point, and really having to figure out, though, what do I actually want for my life? And what is that going to cost me? And am I willing to pay? Like, can I afford it? And then am I willing to pay it? And, it was a lot of reckoning. And in my reckoning, I know that there were people who were collateral damage, to be quite frank, who like were the source of some of that, me trying to sort that out, those battles that I was having with myself that were coming out in my relationships with others, or the things that I was like turning down or not willing to do. And so there was a lot of reckoning during that time. And I agree, I have a lot of empathy for people in that stage of life, just because it's hard, and it's hard to determine what your identity is outside of what your parents or caregivers told you, outside of the friend group that you maybe established in high school or college or what have you, like to actually figure out who you are and what you want for your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm just thinking too, like at Revive, and I don't think this is unique to us specifically, but a lot of clients come see us when they're at the midst of a life transition. And that makes sense because at every stage of change, like our identity can shift in some way. And so it makes sense that people might come in feeling a little like destabilized in terms of how they view themselves or their roles and whatnot. Gosh. And so like how I know you mentioned before, like noticing your self-talk was one way that you started to kind of like understand like what your narrative is, but how does someone kind of figure out that for themselves?
Yeah, so I think self-talk is a really good entry way into some of those narratives. Typically, there's a bit of a loop that we may discover if we pay attention closely enough. Some might refer to it as like a signature theme, or like something that kind of weaves itself through all of the stories that stick out to you as significant. And so it can be things like, I'm not good enough, or I'm not lovable, or, like I'm not worthy, or I'm too fill in the blank, I'm too aggressive, I'm too friendly, I'm too whatever. And so it's like finding those themes that weave through the stories that I think helps to kind of reveal, okay, this is why these stories are significant to me. This is why I have this memory from when I was 5 years old, although I can't remember anything else about being five, but I remember this moment, And so in the work that I'm doing with clients, a lot of times we're exploring those stories together. Sometimes it is my role to notice those things because I do think they're easier to notice from the outside looking in than, when you're talking about yourself, it may be a little bit harder. But I think by looking at, okay, what is it that I am constantly saying to myself? What stories stand out to me as significant, and what thread might weave its way through all of them, and essentially like, what am I believing about myself as a result of that? I think those are some questions that you can ask just to get started. But I do think it's a difficult thing to do completely on your own. It is helpful when you have some support, be it a friend or a therapist, but like someone to kind of help bounce those things off of, just because our perspective, like we all have blind spots. And so, I think it can be helpful to have someone else to like walk through that journey with you.
You said signature theme, and I remember in grad school when I found out what my signature theme was, I was like floored. I was like, oh my God. And it's amazing how like you can have that help in defining that to then help you better understand yourself and your past, to then try to create a different relationship. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
What was your signature theme? Yeah.
I didn't know if it was appropriate to ask, but I'm like, what? Well, I'm curious to know what it is, but also like, what surprised you about it? Was that just not how you viewed yourself, or what?
Whoa. We are not going there right now. I appreciate two therapists asking me. However, no.
Fair. Carli's question was how about that one? About what surprised you about your signature theme?
Well, I didn't even know that there was some sort of underlying voice in my head, or like underlying theme. Like I didn't know that I was carrying this with me in everything that I was doing. So as soon as that was brought to my attention, it was kind of just this like, oh shit moment. And then I couldn't go. It was like everything in grad school, where all of a sudden you can't unlearn something and then you're seeing it everywhere. But then this was super personal. So I was really icky about it. And, until I started exploring it in my own therapy. So like, it was really just a moment where I discovered something about me, and then I saw her everywhere.
Mm. And what I know at Fairfield, this is something that they do. Obviously, it's huge. And being a therapist, it's so important as we're talking about. But like, what were the things that your like program did, or questions they asked you? Like, how did they help you like derive at what your signature theme was?
There were some exercises around like important memories in your life, and there was just a lot of reflection on significant events and people in your life. And I don't remember exactly like what the line of questioning was or anything like that, but I just remember writing down, like we had all these exercises where we had to write down significant moments in our life. And so I'll tell you part of one. One was like middle school, and not fitting in with people that I wanted to be friends with, and getting bullied. And this is very vague, but like written out, it was like very detailed. And then kind of stringing these different memories together, and then pulling from those different memories to then figure out what the commonality was in all of them. Okay, so I remember a little more than I thought that I did. And yeah, so from there, then like it all just sort of like wove together in this big web with this overarching theme, and it just like is staring right at you. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And terrifying.
Yeah, and terrifying. And awful.
I know. As you were saying before, Carli, like I feel like I learned things about myself that I didn't want to know like every day, and it really sucks. Because then you're presented with a choice of like, okay, now I know this thing. Am I really not going to do anything about it? Or damn it, I need to do something about this.
Yeah. And honestly, sometimes the answer is like, no, or not right now. Sometimes it's like, I don't have the capacity to work on that at this moment. But kind of to your point, Catherine, of like, once you see something, you can't unsee it. Then you start to notice the impact of that. Like maybe it's affecting the people in your life who you really care about, but you're recognizing like, me not changing this thing is actually like hurting my relationship, with my partner or with my child or my parent. And so it can sometimes like bring that added motivation that it's worth it to maybe look at, but I hear you. Sometimes it's kind of like, I don't know that I'm ready to tackle this. One thing though that was coming to mind, Catherine, when you were talking is how, and this may be my brain just kind of going somewhere else with it, but I think about how in so many relationships, when it comes to particularly abusive ones, people can really manipulate having access to like knowing what your signature theme is, and use it to hurt you essentially, sometimes intentionally, sometimes like subconsciously. They maybe haven't thought it out this intentionally, but it's still happening. And so I'm actually thinking about how much of a protective measure it can be to at least know what yours is, so that you can be aware when someone is maybe like, using that against you in some way, because if you listen to people, if you listen to most people talk, and I'm a listener, I'm a pretty good listener, people reveal little pieces of it all the time. You have to be paying attention, but it's revealed all the time. And so if someone else is around you, is like very close to you, who you're talking to often about your own self-talk, about your own stories, about what you've experienced, there's a good chance that they may be slightly more aware of what your signature theme is than you even are. And so just thinking about that from a perspective of doing this self-work, sometimes we can really do ourselves a disservice or put ourselves at a disadvantage when we're unwilling to do that work, because you might be kind of giving someone access and not even be able to adequately protect yourself.
Mhm. That's such a good point. And I've definitely seen that come up in my work before, even in my life. Again, and I don't know that it's necessary. I have to believe it's not intentional or malicious. But I mean, who knows, maybe it is. But yeah, like I think that you're right in that, because it is a vulnerability of ours. And so we're that much more susceptible to kind of like be taken advantage of in that way, which doesn't feel good. But one, I guess, question I have is around the expectations regarding maybe signature theme or our narrative, or like, do you think it's possible to like to change our signature theme or change our narrative, or like is it more of a on and off switch or more of a dimmer? Like what should we be aspiring to?
Ooh, good question. Because I think this is a debatable one. I don't like. I have a take, but I could be persuaded. I'll be honest about that. Someone makes a good enough argument. I think I do think that we can change our narratives. I've seen people do it. I'd like to think that in some ways I've done it. But I still believe that that doesn't make you exempt from having to like keep fighting to overcome that. I think it can still show up in ways that you may not be expecting. Like a metaphor that I sometimes use with clients is, if you start exercising, you start lifting weights, and you take a 10-pound weight and you're like lifting it. In the beginning, maybe it feels like really heavy and you're like really sore afterward. And then if you keep doing that more and more, like you become stronger. And so then it maybe doesn't feel so heavy, or you're maybe not as sore afterward. The weight didn't get lighter. It's still 10 pounds, right? So that didn't exactly go away, but it's just like the way that you learn to interact with it, you become more practiced, you become more confident in your ability to overcome it. And so you become stronger. It doesn't become easier, you just get stronger. That's at least the way that I like to think about it, but I'm curious to hear what you all think.
Catherine, do you have a take?
No, I wouldn't disagree. I think it's really possible, and I like the way that you illustrated that. I think it's just all about perspective. So I'm with you.
Am I a huge pessimist? Well, I think my thought around it, like I like your weight visual a lot. And again, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you, but I think the way that I think about most of these things is I think about it as in terms of noise. Like sometimes like the noise, like our self-talk, for example, is so loud. And it really is like all encompassing, all consuming, and the volume is up all the way. And we can do work in therapy or through our own self-discovery to learn how to turn the volume down, but it's probably still going to be in the background somewhere. And then maybe, again, we go through a life stage transition or something might happen, some inciting event that might like make that volume turn up again. But I guess in my mind, it feels like something that will always be with us. It's just the degree to which it impacts us changes over time or depending on what we are experiencing or how much effort we continue to put in it. So I don't think that it can't be changed. I think that it just like in some level like can leave a scar.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, I think
Thoughts?
that's fair. Yeah. I don't see that as totally contradictory to what, I'm saying, because I agree. I think the challenge of it can be different in different stages, right?
Mhm.
So like you talk about that volume going up, I'm thinking about how, we might get really good at lifting that weight and then something shifts with us. We have some change to our body or we get sick or, and then all of a sudden that thing that used to be really easy to manage all of a sudden feels a lot harder. It feels a lot heavier. So I hear you on that. And what I like about it is that it makes me, hopefully the clients also feel less like there's something wrong with them that they haven't overcome this yet, and why am I still dealing with my anxiety is still just like, why can't I get through it? And it's like, it's not going to go away. It's just how we manage it. And it's okay that sometimes that's harder. And then other days it maybe feels a little bit easier. So I feel like it helps to kind of just normalize those ups and downs that we're all going to continue to experience.
Yeah. Okay.
We're such
Any
therapists.
I know. We're like, there's no wrong answer here. It all depends, Are there any last thoughts that you have around or things that you'd like our listeners to know about narrative therapy or just about like change perceptions of self, like any of what we talked about today?
I think I would just say it's worth it. Like it's worth it to do your work. It's hard at times, it doesn't always feel good. It can be really uncomfortable, but it's worth it. And so if you find yourself in any area of your life feeling stuck, feeling like limited by the options that you have, or limited by the experiences that you've had, like it is worth it to take the time to slow down, sit with yourself, really assess like what is it about the way that I'm viewing myself, my own identity that could potentially be getting in the way. It's great to seek out support in that. Of course, I'm going to raise the flag for therapy in that regard, but even just having trusted relationships with people who can give you honest feedback and who you can express some of your feelings, thoughts, ideas too, that can, like really bounce those back or mirror those back to you. I think that helps, but it is absolutely worth it. And it's a lifelong journey or commitment. So it's okay to get tired. It's okay to take breaks. But it's worth it to keep going with it.
I love that. That feels very affirming. Like, okay, I believe you.
Same.
I'll do it. I'll keep going. Well, Carli, thank you so much for coming back again and for sharing your insights and sharing your story as well with us. We really appreciate you and you being here.
Yes, thank you for having me. Always a pleasure. I would love to come back again and be the whatever triple veteran or whatever that is, whatever category that is.
Yes. Yeah, we will for sure have you back. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you again to Carli so much for being here. And thank you to our listeners as well for being with us, for following along, for your reviews, for your follows on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Please also make sure to subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, Wishing You Well by Revive Center for Wellness. And you can follow us on Instagram at Wishing You Well Pod. You can follow our other podcast, Reactivity TV, exclusively on our YouTube channel, Reactivity TV. And you can follow Reactivity TV on Instagram at Reactivity TV. You can follow Catherine on Instagram at Catherine Van Eyck, me at Amy Alvaro LCSW, and you can follow Revive at Revive CFW. You can send us your questions, feedback, suggestions to wishingyouvell@revivecfw.com. We look forward to hearing from you. We'll be back soon with more. And until then, we are wishing you well.